In the tangled heart of downtown Los Angeles, where skyscrapers cast long shadows over cracked sidewalks and neon lights blur into smog, stood a building with a name that made even hardened city dwellers uneasy: the Cecil Hotel. Built in 1924, the Cecil was once the jewel of Main Street, a grand, towering edifice of ambition and promise. Its marble lobby gleamed with Art Deco flair, its windows polished and wide to let in the glow of the California sun. Designed to cater to businessmen, European tourists, and wealthier cross-country travelers, the hotel was a reflection of the city's golden dreams during the Roaring Twenties. For a time, it lived up to its potential. Guests arrived in sleek Packards and Hudsons, greeted by uniformed doormen, their leather suitcases trundled up into suites that promised rest, leisure, and a view of a city rising. But Los Angeles was a city that evolved faster than most. By the early 1930s, the Great Depression cast its long, clawing shadow over the country, and over the Cecil. As businesses shuttered and fortunes vanished overnight, the hotel's clientele changed. Rooms once graced by businessmen and artists now offered a place to sleep for drifters, the desperate, and the destitute. Downtown LA, once a glamorous core, began to decay into a gritty underbelly. The Cecil, caught in the gravity of its surroundings, began its slow descent. Decade by decade, the hotel transformed, not through remodeling, but through attrition. Paint peeled, elevators groaned, and the once grand lobby collected more shadows than guests. It didn't take long before the Cecil became synonymous not with glamour but with tragedy. It had absorbed the trauma of the streets surrounding it. Skid Row, just blocks away, had swollen into a labyrinth of tents, addiction, and invisible suffering. The hotel's towering frame loomed over the city like a forgotten sentinel, a relic of grandeur cursed to witness decline. By the late 20th century, the Cecil was no longer just another rundown hotel, it had become legend. A haunted one. There were whispers, rumors that pulsed beneath the surface like a second heartbeat. They spoke of suicides, overdoses, and violent outbursts. Bodies discovered in rooms days after death. Strangers who had vanished inside without a trace. Over the decades, the hotel's roster of guests included not only the poor and transient, but the disturbed, the dangerous, and, in a few shocking cases, the monstrous. One such guest was Richard Ramirez, later dubbed the Night Stalker. In the summer of 1985, during his spree of brutal home invasions and murders across California, Ramirez reportedly found sanctuary within the Cecil. Locals say he would return to the hotel in blood-stained clothes, slipping through the lobby unnoticed, unchallenged. His room, a dingy upper-floor space without air conditioning, became a lair. But Ramirez wasn't the only predator to haunt the hotel. In the early 1990s, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also stayed there. He claimed to be a reformed man, a writer on a journalistic mission to explore the American justice system. In truth, he had resumed killing. He stalked the very streets the Cecil overlooked, targeting sex workers and strangling them with their own bras, his method eerily similar to his earlier murders in Europe. But it wasn't just the high-profile killers that marked the Cecil's legacy. It was the volume, the sheer, disturbing number, of deaths that occurred there. Suicides became almost commonplace. One woman leapt from a ninth-floor window and killed a pedestrian below. Another man slashed his own throat in a bathtub. Death, like a disease, seeped into the wallpaper and flooring, unseen but ever-present. Some say the Cecil is cursed. Others say it simply became a reflection of its environment, absorbing the pain, decay, and mental illness that ran unchecked through the city's poorest district. Whatever the reason, the hotel had become a place of whispers and shadows, avoided by locals and cautiously documented by urban legends websites and true crime enthusiasts. So when Elisa Lam, a bright-eyed, 21-year-old university student from Vancouver, British Columbia, arrived at the Cecil in January of 2013, her presence barely registered. She came alone, carrying only 2 small bags and a moleskine notebook filled with journal entries and reading lists. Her itinerary was typical for a young tourist. She wanted to explore the West Coast, meet new people, visit bookstores, cafes, and museums. Her Tumblr blog, Modern Day Diary, was filled with whimsical thoughts, snippets of poetry, and reflections on depression and anxiety. She was articulate and introspective, a daughter of Chinese immigrants who worked tirelessly to build a life for their daughters in Canada. Elisa was close to her family. She messaged her parents every day. Her posts painted a portrait of a young woman struggling with mental health, but trying so hard. She had begun her journey in San Diego and moved north to Los Angeles. She had chosen the Cecil Hotel for the same reason many backpackers and budget travelers did: it was cheap. The website advertised affordable lodging downtown, just minutes from public transit, museums, and tourist landmarks. What it didn't advertise were the stains in the carpet, the flickering lights, or the otherworldly stillness that crept in once the sun went down. Elisa was initially assigned to a shared room on the hotel's 5th floor, part of the Stay on Main rebranding effort, a futile attempt to separate the Cecil's past from its present. That floor was supposed to be different. Modern. Safer. But even that section couldn't erase the building's essence. Something lingered in the halls, a weight in the air, a silence that felt like it listened. Within days of her arrival, her roommates asked for her to be moved. According to later reports, Elisa's behavior had become odd. She left notes on the beds warning others to go away, and locked the door multiple times without explanation. She would disappear for hours and return agitated. Some said she talked to herself. Some said she was afraid. Whatever the truth, she was eventually moved to a room of her own. And then, on January 31st, Elisa vanished. She was last seen on surveillance footage, grainy, black and white, time-stamped and silent, inside the hotel's elevator. The footage would later become infamous, studied and dissected by millions around the world. In it, Elisa appears anxious. She steps in and out of the elevator repeatedly. She presses every button in a column. She peeks around the corner into the hallway, as though checking for someone. At one point, she hides in the corner, then makes a series of bizarre hand gestures, as though speaking to someone invisible. Then she walks away. The elevator doors remain open, unmoving. And just like that, she's gone. Days passed. Her parents, worried when she didn't check in, called the LAPD. Flyers were posted. Volunteers scoured the streets. Detectives questioned guests and hotel staff. The building was searched from basement to rooftop, but Elisa had vanished as if swallowed whole. Only weeks later, after guests began to complain about the water, of low pressure, of odd taste and color, did hotel maintenance climb to the roof to check the tanks. Inside one of them, floating face up, naked, was Elisa Lam. The rooftop was supposed to be off limits. The door was locked and alarmed. The water tank's opening was small, heavy to lift. There was no ladder inside. The discovery deepened the mystery, raising more questions than answers. How had she gotten up there? How had she gotten inside? Was she running from someone? Or something? The story exploded across media outlets. Some blamed the hotel's history. Others saw evidence of foul play. Paranormal investigators claimed supernatural influence. Skeptics pointed to her known mental health struggles. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and suggested it was a tragic accident exacerbated by psychosis. But nothing about the case felt ordinary. Not the footage. Not the location. Not the history that wrapped around the building like a second skin. The Cecil Hotel had claimed another story, another soul, and left behind only confusion in its wake. Elisa Lam had stepped into its haunted halls with hope, curiosity, and the same sense of wanderlust so many young travelers carry. She left behind a mystery that would ripple across the internet, spawn documentaries, theories, and forums. And in the shadows of downtown Los Angeles, the Cecil stood still, silent, watching, its legacy sealed once more in death. Elisa Lam was, in many ways, like countless other young women of her generation, smart, curious, and caught between the wide-open promise of the world and the invisible weight she carried within. She was a daughter, a sister, a student, and a writer, raised in the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia, where the mountains stood as silent witnesses to her youth. Born on April 30, 1991, Elisa was the first child of David and Yina Lam, immigrants from Hong Kong who had crossed oceans to find a better life in Canada. Her parents had opened a restaurant, pouring their time and savings into its survival. They worked hard, tirelessly, and in many ways, Elisa was the realization of their hopes. She was the bridge between two worlds. Fluent in English and Cantonese, she moved between her family's Chinese cultural roots and the Western ideals of independence and self-expression with a quiet grace. But Elisa's mind was rarely still. She read voraciously, thought deeply, and saw the world through a kaleidoscope of emotion. At the University of British Columbia, she studied in fits and starts, not always able to keep up with the rhythm of campus life. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the symptoms, highs that danced too close to mania, lows that dipped into deep, suffocating depression, were a constant negotiation. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible, and others when her thoughts came in such rapid torrents that sleep was a foreign concept. Still, she tried. Always, she tried. She turned to writing as a lifeline, pouring her inner world onto the internet in a blog titled Ether Fields. Her entries read like a collage of moods, some poetic, some raw, some darkly humorous. She reflected on fashion trends, pop culture, loneliness, and love. She confessed to feeling like an outsider, someone adrift between identities, between moods, between destinations. But she was self-aware, often sharper about her struggles than the people around her were about their own. And her voice, unfiltered, articulate, wounded, and wise, resonated with the handful of strangers who stumbled across her posts. As 2013 approached, Elisa made a resolution. She would travel. It wasn't just about sightseeing. This was something deeper. A search. A challenge to herself. She wanted to step outside the tight orbit of her familiar world. Her illness had often made her feel limited, her life carefully scheduled around medications, therapy appointments, and rest. But travel offered something else: freedom. Possibility. A test of her own resilience. Her parents, naturally, worried. A solo trip was a bold move, especially for someone managing a mental health condition. But Elisa reassured them. She would be careful. She would check in every day. She would take her medication. And besides, this was something she needed to do, not just for herself, but for her own sense of becoming. And so, in late January, with her prescription medications packed neatly in her bag and a digital camera in hand, Elisa boarded a southbound bus. Her plan was to make her way down the West Coast, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, each city a chapter in a story she hadn't yet written. She began in San Diego, where the Pacific shimmered under clear skies and the air was sweet with the scent of eucalyptus. She went to the zoo and posted pictures of koalas and panda bears. Her blog showed a woman engaged with the world, curious, lively, sometimes tired, but determined. She took selfies in front of sculptures and storefronts, wrote about her longing to connect with others, to shake the feeling of isolation that sometimes clung to her like a second skin. On January 26, she arrived in Los Angeles. It was a sprawling city that offered both wonder and contradiction. Elisa had imagined palm trees, creative energy, a sense of discovery. What she found was something else entirely. Downtown Los Angeles was not the Hollywood dreamscape many travelers expected. It was rougher, more complex. Sidewalks gave way to tents and shelters, and the juxtaposition of wealth and poverty was impossible to ignore. Still, she pressed on, checking into the Cecil Hotel that afternoon. The decision to stay at the Cecil likely came down to cost. The hotel's online listings under its rebranded name, Stay on Main, offered affordable rates for students and backpackers. It promised free Wi-Fi, daily housekeeping, and a central location. The photos showed modern rooms with fresh paint and minimalist decor. What it didn't show was the building's past, or the fact that the rebranding was little more than a cosmetic layer on top of decades of decay. Elisa was assigned to a shared room on the 5th floor. For a few days, things seemed fine. She explored the neighborhood, browsed local bookstores, and likely wandered through the eclectic chaos of the fashion district. She wrote blog posts about her thoughts and observations, often candid about her emotional state. But then something shifted. Her roommates complained to the staff. They said Elisa was behaving strangely, locking them out, taping notes to their belongings with cryptic messages. It was unclear what exactly had changed, but it was enough that the hotel moved her to a private room on January 28th. No one knows precisely what Elisa was thinking during those final days. Her online activity began to dwindle. She made a few posts, some cryptic, others melancholic. On January 30th, she visited the Last Bookstore, a local LA landmark. A photograph captured her standing by a stack of books, dressed in a red hoodie, smiling faintly. It would be the last known image of her alive, taken by the store's owner, who later recalled that she was quiet but friendly, nothing unusual. And then came January 31st. Elisa didn't call home that day. For most young adults, a missed check-in wouldn't cause immediate concern. But Elisa had been diligent, calling her parents daily. She knew they worried about her. They trusted her, but cautiously. She had promised to keep them informed. So when the call didn't come, her parents noticed. By February 1st, panic had set in. They contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. Officers visited the Cecil and began a preliminary investigation. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, Elisa's smiling face, her age, height, last seen location. Her parents, frantic, flew in from Vancouver to aid the search. They spoke at press conferences, urging anyone with information to come forward. They pleaded in Cantonese and English, voices cracking with emotion. Meanwhile, the LAPD searched the hotel from bottom to top. They checked the lobby, her room, common areas, hallways. They interviewed staff and guests. But the building was vast, 15 floors, nearly 700 rooms, a maze of staircases, old plumbing, and forgotten passageways. And Elisa, it seemed, had vanished into thin air. The investigators were baffled. Her belongings were still in her room. Her laptop. Her wallet. Her medication. Nothing had been taken. There were no signs of a struggle. No witnesses reported seeing her leave. She was simply gone. Outside the hotel, the city pulsed on. Tourists drifted along the Walk of Fame. Studio tours rolled on. The sun set each day behind the skyline, unaware that a young woman had disappeared beneath its glow. But inside the Cecil, tension was rising. Hotel guests began complaining of strange water. Some said it tasted odd. Others described a dark tint, a foul smell. The pressure dropped noticeably. One couple reported taking a shower only to be hit with what looked like black sludge. It would take nearly 3 weeks for the maintenance staff to climb onto the roof and check the water tanks. Until then, all anyone could do was search and speculate. Internet forums lit up. Reddit threads began theorizing everything from abduction to mental breakdown to paranormal interference. True crime enthusiasts began digging into the Cecil's past. Journalists looked into Elisa's blog. And slowly, the disappearance took on a life of its own. She was no longer just a missing person. She was a mystery. A question. A ghost haunting the modern mind. The story of Elisa Lam, still unfinished, hovered like fog over downtown Los Angeles, thickening with every passing hour. The footage was less than 4 minutes long. On February 13, 2013, 13 days after Elisa Lam was last seen, the Los Angeles Police Department made a decision that would forever change the trajectory of her case. With few leads, no witnesses, and a growing sense of public urgency, they released a surveillance video to the public, asking for help identifying Elisa's last known movements. It was pulled from a security camera mounted inside one of the Cecil Hotel's aging elevators, time-stamped January 31st, the day Elisa vanished. There was no warning for what people were about to see. The video was uploaded to YouTube, and within hours, it was shared across social media, news outlets, forums, and blogs. People around the world watched it in disbelief. They watched it again. And again. And again. Every frame felt like a clue. Every movement, a question. The footage begins simply enough. The elevator doors slide open, and Elisa steps inside. She is wearing a red hoodie over a gray t-shirt and black shorts. Her dark hair is parted in the middle, hanging in soft waves around her face. She looks like any ordinary young woman, until she doesn't. Elisa leans forward, her finger pressing a sequence of buttons on the control panel, multiple floors, one after the other, as though unsure where to go or in a hurry to go everywhere at once. Then she retreats to the back corner of the elevator and waits. But the doors don't close. She steps forward, tentatively, peeking her head into the hallway as if looking for someone, perhaps to see if she is being followed. She ducks back inside, pressing herself against the wall, then steps out again. Her head swivels quickly from side to side. Then she hides. She flattens herself against the wall near the control panel, out of view of anyone passing by. Her body language is anxious, furtive, as though she is playing a game of hide-and-seek or trying desperately to avoid being seen. But there is no one else in the video. What comes next is what ignited the wildfire of public speculation. Elisa steps out of the elevator and begins to move her hands in a strange, almost ritualistic way. She lifts them in slow, exaggerated motions, bending her fingers, pushing the air, almost as if she's speaking with her hands to someone invisible. The gestures are not random. They are deliberate, slow, like pantomime. Some viewers described it as talking to a ghost. Others saw it as a cry for help. And then, she walks out of frame. The elevator doors, which had remained inexplicably open for over 2 minutes, finally close, and open again. And again. The elevator begins moving only after she has gone, stopping on floor after floor, opening to empty hallways. End of video. There was no scream. No visible assailant. No blood. No sound. Just Elisa's movements, distorted slightly by the lens, framed in cold fluorescence, played on loop across millions of screens around the globe. Theories erupted like brush fires. By the next morning, the phrase, Elisa Lam elevator video, was trending worldwide. Reddit threads sprang up by the dozen, dissecting the footage frame by frame. YouTube creators posted reaction videos and breakdowns. Paranormal forums lit up with speculation. TikTokers would later recreate her gestures with eerie precision, turning her final moments into internet folklore. But at the core of it all, one question repeated again and again: what happened to her? Some viewers were convinced Elisa was being followed, that she had entered the elevator trying to escape someone. They speculated about a stalker, a hotel employee, a murderer lying just out of view. The fact that she pressed multiple buttons and tried to hide lent credibility to that theory. Why else would she act so erratically? Why else would she keep glancing over her shoulder? Others leaned toward the supernatural. The Cecil Hotel's history was no secret by now, especially not online. True crime sleuths had already connected the dots. This was the same hotel where Richard Ramirez had lived during his Night Stalker rampage. Where suicides occurred with disturbing frequency. Where women had jumped, or been pushed, from windows, where strange deaths piled up like forgotten stories. Elisa's strange hand movements, the inexplicable elevator behavior, and her final disappearance all seemed to echo something unexplainable. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators saw signs of possession, of otherworldly influence. They pointed to urban legends, to haunted architecture, to thin places where the veil between dimensions supposedly breaks. Then came a more grounded, though no less haunting, explanation, a psychological break. Elisa's own blog had documented her struggles with bipolar disorder. She had written candidly about her experience with depressive episodes and hypomania. Medical professionals and mental health advocates suggested the footage showed signs of acute psychosis, a possible result of her condition if she had stopped taking her medication or suffered a chemical imbalance. Her behavior in the video, rapid mood shifts, paranoia, hallucinatory interaction, could have been the result of a manic or psychotic episode. Some viewers found this the most plausible theory. Others dismissed it, arguing that it didn't account for her physical disappearance or the eventual location of her body. There was, after all, a question no theory could comfortably answer. How did Elisa Lam end up dead in a locked, sealed water tank on the hotel's roof? The viral spread of the video transformed Elisa from a missing person to a modern myth. Online communities gave her nicknames: the girl in the elevator, the ghost of the Cecil, Red Hoodie Girl. They created fan art, tribute videos, even ghost stories that blurred fact and fiction. The video became a cultural artifact, part horror movie, part true crime, part internet legend. But at the center of the hysteria was a real woman, a daughter, a friend, someone whose life had been reduced to a series of 4 minutes and a series of unanswered questions. Her family, still in Los Angeles, watched as their daughter's final recorded moments were devoured by the world. While they grieved and searched for answers, strangers across continents turned her final moments into conspiracy theories, YouTube content, Reddit karma, and clickbait headlines. Elisa's disappearance was no longer just a case. It was an obsession. People began calling the hotel. Tourists visited the Cecil to ride the very elevator she used. Ghost hunters trespassed in the hallways at night. Some even climbed the fire escapes in an attempt to reach the rooftop, retracing what they imagined might have been Elisa's final steps. The Cecil Hotel was once again infamous, not for its history, but for something current. The past had caught up with the present, and the result was a digital seance on a global scale. As February unfolded, police remained tight-lipped. They urged the public not to draw conclusions. But the damage, or transformation, was already done. The case had gone viral, and with that, it had slipped from the hands of law enforcement into the hands of the internet, where theories spiraled out of control. Even now, over a decade later, people still point to that elevator footage as one of the most unsettling pieces of real-life mystery ever captured on tape. Its grainy, low-resolution texture only heightens its strangeness. Its silence screams louder than any sound could. In the end, the video revealed everything and nothing. It showed Elisa's final confirmed movements. It showed her alive. Anxious. Afraid. But it didn't show what happened next. And so, a single piece of surveillance footage became a window into a tragedy that no one could fully explain. It became a mirror for the fears, curiosities, and obsessions of a digital world desperate for answers, and addicted to mystery. Elisa Lam, a woman searching for freedom and discovery, had become a riddle buried in code and pixels. And the Cecil Hotel, once again, had become the stage for a story that didn't seem real, except that it was. For 19 days, Elisa Lam was missing. In the space of those 19 days, Los Angeles turned cold and strange. A city that thrived on motion began to pause and look inward, caught in the grip of a growing enigma. Downtown life continued, buses roared down South Main Street, vendors opened their shops, and the Cecil Hotel kept accepting guests. But an unease hung over the building like smog. Inside the hotel, guests were beginning to notice something peculiar, something wrong. First came the complaints. The water pressure had dropped. Faucets sputtered. Showers dripped feebly. And when the water did come, it ran dark, like rust or ink, before clearing. Some guests said it tasted metallic. Others said it smelled foul, like sewage or rot. One British tourist reported brushing her teeth only to gag at the strange aftertaste. A couple from Hong Kong described the water as black and oily. It wasn't just discolored, it was disturbing. Still, the hotel management offered only apologies. Downtown LA was old, they said. Plumbing issues happened. Maintenance would be sent up. The Cecil Hotel had weathered worse. But behind the front desk, the whispers had started. Some staff members had heard the police were still searching the hotel. Guests had asked about the missing girl. Flyers with Elisa Lam's photo were still pinned near the elevator. And then there was the elevator footage, released just 6 days earlier. That chilling, grainy video had gone viral, and now tourists were arriving because of it. Something was happening. Something more than broken plumbing. On the morning of February 19, 2013, a hotel maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez climbed up to the rooftop. It was routine, in theory. Lopez had been told to check the water tanks, for large, industrial cylinders positioned on a platform above the roof, supplying water to guest rooms, the kitchen, and the lobby. The tanks were sealed and heavy-lidded, accessed only by ladder. In theory, they were secure. In theory, no one should have been near them. Lopez climbed carefully. The morning air was sharp with haze. He reached the platform and approached the first tank, the one closest to the front of the building. He pulled himself up, balanced on the narrow ledge, and gripped the lid. It was heavier than expected. With effort, he pushed it open, and froze. Inside the dark water, barely visible at first, floated the body of a young woman. She was naked. Face up. Her skin had turned pale from the cold water, her hair fanned out around her like seaweed. There were no immediate signs of injury. Just stillness. Her eyes were open. It was Elisa Lam. News spread fast, first among hotel staff, then to the police, then to the world. By midday, yellow police tape ringed the building. Fire trucks, ambulances, and forensics vans parked haphazardly along South Main. Helicopters circled overhead. News crews scrambled to get footage. Tourists and pedestrians gawked from behind barricades, unsure whether they were witnessing a crime scene or a movie shoot. But this was no fiction. The girl who had smiled for the camera in the last bookstore. The girl in the elevator. The daughter who never called home. She had been here the whole time, floating above everyone. Literally inside the hotel's drinking water. Her body was recovered only after the tank was drained and cut open from the side. The access hatch was too narrow to remove her otherwise. Inside the tank, investigators found her clothes, soaked and tangled at the bottom, the red hoodie, t-shirt, shorts, and underwear she'd been wearing in the elevator footage. Her room key and watch were also found, dropped among the sludge and sediment. But there was something deeply strange about the logistics. The tanks were 8 feet tall, with heavy metal lids. They had no internal ladders. The hotel roof itself was not accessible to guests, at least not easily. The stairway was locked, and a security alarm was supposed to trigger if someone opened the door without authorization. Yet Elisa had somehow reached the roof, climbed onto the tank platform, removed the lid, and entered the water, all on her own. And if not on her own, then how? The autopsy report, released several months later, only deepened the confusion. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, with Elisa's bipolar disorder cited as a significant contributing factor. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of sexual assault, and no illegal drugs found in her system. Toxicology showed trace amounts of her prescribed medications, likely antidepressants and mood stabilizers, but inconsistencies raised eyebrows. Some levels were lower than expected. Was she skipping doses? Had she stopped her medication during her trip? If so, It could have triggered a psychotic episode, paranoia, hallucinations, erratic behavior. The coroner suggested this could explain her disoriented state in the elevator footage, as well as her actions on the roof. But others weren't so sure. Critics pointed to how difficult it would have been for anyone, let alone a young woman in a state of distress, to access the roof without triggering alarms, scale the tank, open the lid, undress, and willingly climb inside. The tanks were not designed for access. There were no footprints on the dusty rooftop. The lid, when found, was closed, though Lopez said he had to open it to discover her. Had someone closed it after her? Was she placed there? Or had the chaos of the moment, media confusion, changing witness statements, simply distorted the facts? The inconsistencies became fuel for an inferno of theories. Online, the reaction was explosive. Redditors dissected the autopsy report line by line, highlighting phrases like submersion interval unknown and manner of death undetermined before additional testing. YouTubers posted elaborate breakdowns, mapping Elisa's probable path through the hotel. Paranormal investigators offered ghostly interpretations, claiming Elisa had been lured to the roof by a malevolent force. Even darker ideas circulated. Had Elisa met someone at the hotel? A stranger? An employee? Was there something sinister about the guests on her floor? Some pointed out that serial killer Jack Unterweger had once stayed at the Cecil. Was there a copycat? Then came the most infamous theory, that Elisa was the victim of something planned, a cover-up. Some noted that Elisa's death bore eerie similarities to a 1990s horror film, Dark Water, in which a young girl dies in a rooftop water tank, causing black water to seep into the building below. Others noticed an eerie coincidence with a tuberculosis test being conducted in downtown LA around the same time, named LAM Elisa. To some, it was all coincidence. To others, evidence. The LAPD, for their part, issued no further statements. The case was closed. They found no signs of foul play. They found no one to charge. But for Elisa Lam's family, and for millions who followed the story, it was far from over. Back in Vancouver, the Lam family grieved in private. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, claiming negligence in security and safety measures. Their daughter, they argued, should never have been able to access the roof. The case was eventually dismissed, but the trauma remained. They never spoke publicly of the elevator footage. They never engaged with the conspiracy theories. What the world had turned into spectacle, they bore as sorrow. To them, Elisa was not a ghost, a mystery, or a meme. She was a daughter who never came home. And yet the questions remain. Why was the elevator malfunctioning in the footage? How did Elisa reach the roof undetected? Why was the hatch reportedly closed if she entered on her own? Why did her behavior oscillate so wildly, between fearful and calm, rational and erratic? No theory explains it all. The official explanation, accidental death, exacerbated by bipolar disorder, is plausible. But it leaves emotional gaps. How did she feel in those final moments? Was she scared? Confused? Was she aware of what she was doing? Did she intend it? Or was she running from something we'll never see? In the end, the truth may be less dramatic than the theories, but no less tragic. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She had dreams of discovering the world, finding herself, and living on her terms. But something, illness, fear, chaos, or something else, led her to the rooftop of one of Los Angeles's most haunted buildings. And there, in the quiet of a cold steel tank, her story ended. Or, more accurately, her life ended. Her story still echoes. Elisa Lam was found in a place she never should have been. That fact alone, simple, stubborn, has haunted investigators, family, theorists, and casual readers of her story for over a decade. In the weeks following the discovery of her body, attention turned sharply toward a single, critical question. How did Elisa get to the roof? The answer, like nearly everything in this case, only seemed to generate more questions. The roof of the Cecil Hotel wasn't designed for guests. There were two primary routes to the top. One was an internal staircase, locked and alarmed, accessible only with a staff keycard. The other was an external fire escape, a steel framework clinging to the building side, accessible through windows, some of which were difficult to open or located in locked areas. If Elisa had taken the internal stairwell, the alarm system should have sounded, a high-pitched, echoing tone audible across several floors. No such alarm was reported. And if she had used the fire escape, how had she accessed the window without being seen, heard, or leaving signs of a forced exit? Investigators tested both paths. Police confirmed that if someone had exited the stairwell through the rooftop door without a key, an alarm would have sounded. But there were no records of staff hearing it. No logs. No eyewitnesses. Nothing in the surveillance footage from the hallway showed Elisa heading toward the stairwell, and no cameras were stationed on the stairs themselves. The fire escape was more plausible, but deeply troubling. It required exiting through a window, climbing onto the escape, and scaling several stories up a narrow, rusted metal ladder. The final stretch, from the roof's edge to the tank platform, demanded careful footing across a ledge or pipe system. There were no railings. No safety barriers. It was possible, yes. But plausible? Would a young woman in an altered state, scared, manic, or confused, choose this route? Would she have had the strength and focus to climb the tank itself, open the lid, which weighed more than 20 pounds, undress, and lower herself in? Or had someone led her there? Someone with knowledge of the hotel's access points. Someone who knew how to avoid the cameras. Much of what haunts Elisa Lam's case is not what we see, but what we don't. There was no footage of her leaving the building. There was no footage of her climbing the stairs, accessing the roof, or entering restricted areas. The elevator footage, released by LAPD on February 13th, remains the last known visual record of Elisa Lam alive. It's chilling not just for her strange behavior, but because it ends abruptly, without resolution. In a hotel riddled with cameras, the absence of evidence became its own mystery. Critics pointed out that no camera footage was ever released showing the stairwell or other hallways beyond the elevator. Why not? Was there nothing there? Or was something being withheld? Online sleuths, fueled by the void, speculated wildly. Had someone followed her into the elevator, someone who stayed just out of frame? Was she hiding from someone? Was her behavior a silent cry for help, or the effects of a manic or psychotic episode brought on by her bipolar disorder? Or had the video itself been edited, cut, slowed, or manipulated to obscure the truth? Some claimed the timestamp in the footage jumped. Others said frames were missing. Experts debated it on forums and video essays for years. Even if the edits were innocent, perhaps redacted by police for privacy, the damage had been done. Where there are gaps, stories grow. And Elisa's story was fertile ground for myth. Mental illness or murder? The simplest explanation, and the one offered by the coroner's office, is this: Elisa Lam was experiencing a mental health crisis. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. Her blog posts, archived long before her death, document her struggles with mood swings, insomnia, isolation, and the toll of psychiatric medications. At times she was reflective and optimistic. At others, she seemed overwhelmed and afraid. In the days before her disappearance, hotel staff reportedly moved her from a shared room to a private one after complaints from roommates about her behavior. Though this incident remains vague, it hints that Elisa may have been in an unstable state. Toxicology reports found only traces of her prescribed medications in her system, suggesting non-compliance with her treatment. Missing doses or abrupt changes in medication can be disastrous for someone with bipolar disorder, especially if triggered by the stress of solo travel. Under this lens, her elevator behavior is not mysterious, it's tragic. A young woman, frightened and disoriented, trying to navigate an unfamiliar world while spiraling out of control. Her rooftop journey could have been impulsive, driven by hallucination, fear, or symbolic thinking. She might have removed her clothes because she felt hot, a symptom of hypothermia or psychosis. She may have believed the tank held something she needed: safety, water, meaning. But even this theory has holes. If she was experiencing a manic or psychotic episode severe enough to lead her to the rooftop and into the tank, how did she manage such a complex physical feat? Why were there no outward signs of struggle, no injuries from the climb or fall? Why, in her confusion, did she leave behind no trace? And how did she replace the heavy tank lid behind her, if she truly went in alone? The theories multiply. In the vacuum of certainty, the internet did what it always does: it created its own logic. Dozens of theories emerged, some plausible, others fantastical. Foul play: Elisa was murdered and her death staged to look like an accident. The hotel, fearing liability, cooperated in a cover-up. Stalker theory: someone followed Elisa during her travels, someone she met online or at the hotel. The elevator game: a viral urban legend claimed that by pressing buttons in a certain sequence, one could open a portal to another dimension. Some said Elisa had played it, and gotten stuck. Paranormal explanation: ghosts, demons, cursed spirits from the hotel's violent past had possessed or lured Elisa to her death. Government experimentation: Elisa's erratic behavior, strange death, and the tuberculosis outbreak, see below, were part of a test or population control effort. Simulation hypothesis: some posited that we live in a computer simulation, and that Elisa's death was a glitch in the matrix, symbolized by the elevator's malfunctioning behavior. Each theory had its adherents, and each eroded the boundary between speculation and reality. Of all the eerie coincidences surrounding Elisa Lam's death, one stood out above the rest. In early 2013, shortly before and after Elisa's body was found, an outbreak of tuberculosis swept through Skid Row, a poverty-stricken district just blocks from the Cecil Hotel. Health officials deployed teams to conduct mass testing and containment. The name of the rapid diagnostic test used to detect TB? Elisa. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's real. Elisa stands for lipoarabinomannan enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, a technical term combining a TB biomarker, LAM, with a common immunology technique, ELISA. Scientists had been using the test for years. But now, in the exact location of Elisa's death, during the same week of her disappearance, it surfaced with uncanny relevance. To some, this was just an unfortunate coincidence, nothing more than linguistic irony. To others, it was a breadcrumb. Proof of something orchestrated. Elisa was involved in something bigger, whether she knew it or not. The conspiracy ballooned from there. Was Elisa a test subject? Was she silenced for witnessing something she shouldn't have? Was the Elisa test being secretly deployed in a biological experiment on the homeless? Was the Cecil Hotel being used as a vector or cover-up site? These ideas may sound outlandish, but in the echo chamber of the internet, where facts and fear mix freely, they gain traction. Suddenly, Elisa wasn't just a student on a tragic solo journey. She was a symbol. A cipher. A case. As the years passed, Elisa Lam's story took on a second life. Documentaries were made. Podcasts dissected every detail. Theories shifted and mutated like viruses, infecting new minds. The Cecil Hotel, long considered cursed or haunted, became the centerpiece of a cultural obsession with dark tourism. The Netflix documentary Crime Scene, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel brought renewed attention in 2021. It attempted to bridge the divide between fact and fiction, highlighting the case's complex intersection of mental health, media frenzy, and historical context. But even that documentary, at times, strayed into sensationalism. What remained lost, amid the noise, was Elisa herself. She was not an experiment. Not a meme. Not a ghost. She was a young woman, vulnerable and vibrant, struggling to understand herself in a world that offered few safe places. Her death may have been an accident, or the result of mental illness, or something more. But it was real. It was human. And it hurt. So how did she get to the rooftop? Maybe she found an open window and climbed, desperate and delusional, chasing some vision only she could see. Maybe she was helped by someone who left no trace. Maybe she didn't die alone. Or maybe the truth is this: the story of Elisa Lam defies neat answers. And that's why we can't let it go. It touches something primal, the fear of being misunderstood, the fragility of the mind, the terror of vanishing without explanation. It's the kind of story that lives in the quiet space between fact and faith, between what we can explain and what we can't. The rooftop was locked. But she got there anyway. And that fact, unmoving, unresolved, sits at the heart of a mystery that may never be solved. The story of Elisa Lam didn't end with her discovery in the rooftop water tank. It didn't end with the coroner's report, the internet theories, or the camera footage played on loop. Instead, her story took on a life of its own, a ripple in the digital age, a modern myth woven from tragedy, speculation, and the aching need to find meaning in something inexplicable. Years passed. But the questions never did. In 2021, the release of Netflix's crime scene, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel reignited the conversation, reopened old wounds, reframed the mystery, and reminded a global audience of a story they had not forgotten. The documentary sought to balance narratives. It gave voice to hotel employees, internet sleuths, journalists, and psychologists. It reminded viewers that Elisa Lam was not just a headline, but a person. A daughter. A student. A young woman navigating the instability of mental illness while reaching for independence and self-discovery. But it also reignited something darker. Theories resurfaced. The elevator video was dissected once more. The armchair detectives returned, some emboldened by the platform, others humbled by the weight of the story. Many questioned whether media attention, social and otherwise, had gone too far. Whether fascination had become exploitation. What began as concern had morphed into obsession. In the digital echo chamber, Elisa became both symbol and spectacle, another soul lost in the blur between fact and fiction. As public attention lingered, the Cecil Hotel sought transformation. By 2021, the infamous structure had been rebranded as Stay on Main, a hybrid of hotel and low-income housing, now under different management. New paint, new policies, and new signage tried to erase what once was. But buildings remember. And so do people. Tourists still photograph its facade. YouTubers chronicle their stay in hushed tones. Podcasts retell the story with dramatic music and whispered questions. The Cecil's past is now its brand, even as it attempts to flee it. And Elisa's case, her presence, her mystery, remains its spectral centerpiece. The final, enduring tragedy in a history already steeped in darkness. What really happened to Elisa Lam? Theories, stacked high and deep, still fail to bring clarity. The most grounded answer, the one offered by the coroner and supported by her medical history, is that she suffered a psychotic or manic episode. That her death, however improbable in mechanics, was a tragic accident. That explanation, while logical, leaves something unresolved in the collective mind. It doesn't soothe the ache of not knowing why, or how such a strange and improbable sequence of events could unfold without intervention, without warning, without witness. For some, that absence of certainty is unbearable. For others, it is the only fitting end to a story so layered in ambiguity. Perhaps there was no killer. No grand conspiracy. No hidden hand behind the door. Perhaps the horror lies not in what was done to Elisa, but in what she experienced alone. In the silence of a mind at war with itself, inside a building with a past full of ghosts. And so we return, again and again, to the image that launched it all. Elisa Lam, standing in an elevator. Pressing buttons. Looking out into a hallway that never reveals its secret. Hiding in the corner. Stepping out. Stepping back in. Waving her arms as though communicating with someone, or something, we cannot see. And then, she vanishes. The doors open. Close. Open again. As if the building itself can't decide whether to hold her or let her go. It is a moment suspended in time. No dialogue. No soundtrack. Just grainy footage and the flicker of something unfathomable beneath the surface. That elevator became a symbol. Of isolation. Of fear. Of mental illness. Of mystery. It is Elisa's last known appearance, and the world has watched it millions of times, searching for answers in her gestures, in her shadow, in the movement of the elevator itself. Elisa Lam is remembered not just for how she died, but for the questions she left behind. In an era where every moment is captured, filtered, uploaded, and dissected, her story exposed the limits of what we can truly know. It revealed how vulnerable truth is when passed through the prism of the internet. And how quickly the human heart can be buried beneath hashtags and headlines. She was more than a mystery. She was 21 years old. A reader. A writer. A dreamer. Someone who quoted Chuck Palahniuk and Virginia Woolf on her blog. Someone who struggled with her mind but refused to let that struggle define her. She wrote once, "You're always haunted by the idea you're wasting your life." And in the end, she became part of a narrative far larger than herself. There is no epilogue to Elisa Lam's story. No moment where it all makes sense. No final clue that ties every thread together. There is only what we know, and what we don't. She checked into a hotel with a long, dark history. She disappeared. She was found in a place she shouldn't have been. And in her absence, she became a mirror, for our fears, our questions, and the stories we tell to explain the inexplicable. Some say she died alone. But perhaps not. Perhaps, in the end, Elisa Lam became part of something larger, a shared moment in the collective consciousness. A symbol of how fragile life is, how fragile we are, and how deeply we crave understanding in a world that offers very little of it. The Cecil Hotel stands still. The elevator still opens and closes. And somewhere, in the minds of those who remember, Elisa remains. Not just as a question, but as a name.